This is Angry Bob, the man with the industrial dick, coming at you loud and clear on WAR Radio. Rise and shine, folks. It's a beautiful day. Just look at that sky. It's a work of art. Ha! Nature never knew colors like that. And a friendly reminder, when you look at it, be sure to wear your shades. The radiation count's way up and the heat wave ain't expected to let up either. Weather control tell us it'll probably hit 110 downtown before nightfall. As for the good news, there is no fucking good news.
You pushing something? See where it is, Shades. Let me see. Where'd you find it?
Glass flats. June C.
I'll give you 30. 50. And then you'd see it my way.
Hello?
You gonna let me in or what?
It's horrible.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
What is it?
Maintenance drone, I think. I picked him up out in the zone. Probably some kind of new design they're testing it.
Sterile electronics.
Government funding to the Mark 13 project is currently under suspension due to minor problems with the prototype's insulation system, currently susceptible to high levels of moisture and humidity. Designed primarily for arid terrain, the Mark 13 is self-repairing, capable of recharging its storage batteries from just about any power grid, including the sun.
Thought you could make an ashtray out of it or something.
Just look at the workmanship. It's so beautiful.
Merry Christmas, baby.
I gotta see you. Sorry to call you so late, but it's important.
Jesus, Albie, talk to me in the morning.
Meet me in the yard in 1 hour and bring the Mark 13 with you.
The what?
Oh no, the skull and bones.
No way, Albie.
Hear me out. I can't talk on the phone. There's too many ears. Meet me in 1 hour.
The sci-fi horror Hardware hit the big screen the 14th of September 1990 in the USA and got its official UK release on the 5th of October. Produced for an incredibly low amount of £960,000. It went on to make over $5 million worldwide thanks to Miramax, who pushed it heavily for its US market, and it reached a number 6 spot at the box office in its first week. For a small independent movie, it was considered a success. They had run into problems, however, with the MPAA before its release in the USA due to issues with its gore and sexual nature. It had to be trimmed back to get an R rating. Over the years, when you see releases advertised uncut, what you're actually seeing is the cut that was released outside the USA. More serious problems arose due to copyright infringement with its story. When the film came out, it was brought to the attention of 2000 AD's publishers that the movie had borrowed the plot from a short 7-page story called Shock. That was published in a Judge Dredd annual in 1981, written and drawn by Kevin O'Neill. The story involved a guy purchasing robot parts for his girlfriend, who in turn uses it to make an art piece, but then it kicks back into operation and tries to kill her. If you are familiar with Hardware, you can see the obvious comparisons, but to the director Richard Stanley's defence, he had been inspired by other materials such as Soylent Green, Damnation Alley, The Long Tomorrow and the works of Philip K. Dick. Richard was unaware of the legal issues surrounding the comparisons between his script and the old Future Shock story after the release of the movie, as it was handled by the producers behind the scenes, but later had to admit he had borrowed ideas from it, but in large most of the script is based on his old short movie, Incidents in an Expanding Universe. Richard's cousin had worked for IPC during the time when they were publishing 2000 AD, and the comics surrounded Richard in his youth, so the designs and stories had in some part influenced him with the writing process of Hardware. Fleetway Comics brought a successful lawsuit that the film plagiarised the comic strip, so a notice was added to the DVD and Blu-ray releases giving credits to the strip's publisher. There were also other legal problems on who owned the movie. Once the VHS and Laserdisc had been released, Palace Pictures went bust and the library of movies was sold off to Polygram. Then the rights moved to Universal Pictures and then to MGM. Also Miramax played a part in this, so you have many parties involved, further delaying any release of the movie on current video formats. Thankfully, come 2009, these issues were eventually resolved. During the 80s, the director of Hardware, Richard Stanley, had been working in the music industry directing music videos for Fields of Nephilim, Public Image Limited and Renegade Soundwave, and had always wanted to move into feature films. He had a desire to produce more than just music videos and short movies. The production company he was hired by to direct the music videos was Wicked Films and TV Limited, who was made up of other filmmakers who wanted to push forward with their careers and move into feature film production. Getting into the industry was a challenge for many creative people, because you had to be part of a union and jumping through those hoops to be part of one wasn't easy. So many young filmmakers went into music videos as that wasn't under strict union rules and membership. Everyone at Wicked Film and TV wanted to make a movie, and the easiest way to get the finances was to produce a genre picture, either it be sci-fi or horror. Richard had already developed a feature-length script called Hardware, based off a short Super 8 movie he made in 1985, called Incidents in an Expanding Universe. His script was sold a few years back, and made its way to the producers at Wicked Film and TV, and they loved it. And with it being a genre piece, it got an interest from Palace Pictures, who at the time had made a name for themselves distributing Evil Dead and Diva. They finally got hold of Richard, who was out in Afghanistan to document the Soviet war, and managed to get him to return to England and shoot the film. To help with financing, Palace Pictures got Miramax involved to handle distribution in the USA. Hardware became the first picture Miramax and Palace Pictures co-financed. With Miramax involved came a number of ideas they wanted implemented. They wanted the movie to have some American actors involved so it could be marketed to US audiences, and the violence to be toned down as the original script had far more death scenes than what we eventually saw in the final cut. Originally the film was set in England in a futuristic council estate. With Miramax wanting American leads, it changed the setting to New York. Richard tried to confuse people by having the security guards be Caribbean, the people downstairs were Chinese, and the character Shades is Northern Irish, which is what sci-fi films set in the future tend to do with having a mix of cultures. The production started in September of 1989, shot entirely in London, making use of the Roundhouse at Spiller's Wharf in East London, and the opening scene was shot in Morocco with a skeleton crew and was the last piece to be shot in the production. The Roundhouse was a complete shell at the time and had been lying derelict for years. With it being located directly next to a railway line, it made it difficult to record sound, but otherwise it was ideal. They constructed Jill's apartment in the middle of the Roundhouse, and with it being a non-union production, they could film for 24 hours a day. So during the day the actors would do their scenes, and a majority of the sequences featuring the robot would be handled in the evening and early hours. Other locations in and around London helped expand the dystopian future. For the scenes with Mo and Shades walking through rubble and metallic junk, the crew didn't really have to do much set dressing. There were many parts of London that hadn't been redeveloped and had been left in a mess for years, so it made it really easy for the filmmakers to capture a derelict wasteland. For the props and costumes, in order to save money, they went to military auctions and purchased old equipment and clothes that could be modified or taken apart to create new sets and outfits for the actors. You may notice at the end of the movie it says dedicated to Richard Bedford, who was actually the original editor of the movie, but sadly passed away while they were shooting. The main cast of Hardware is pretty small in numbers, but does have some interesting cameos. Dylan McDermott plays Moses Baxter, known to his friends as Mo. He is an ex-soldier with very religious views. He has an artificial hand that gives him extra strength. The part was originally intended for Bill Paxton. Paxton was enthusiastic about the script, but Miramax and Palace Pictures apparently didn't know much about Bill, and his agent wasn't contacted, and by the time someone got around to speaking with him, he'd signed on to Navy SEALs. Dylan was going through a bad patch at the time of shooting. He was dating Julia Roberts, and halfway into the shoot they separated, so he became very depressed, and Richard Stanley felt the tone of his performance had changed. Stacy Travis plays Jill, Mo's girlfriend, who works as a sculptor and is living on benefits. She spends her spare time smoking the government-controlled cannabis cigarettes and watching the disturbing imagery that now dominates TV. In this future, torture, images of death, footage of dictators dominates the networks. John Lynch plays Shades, who is a heavy drug user and takes a made-up drug called Moonflash. He apparently takes LSD, but they couldn't say that on film, so they changed the name. His character's backstory is not revealed, but the director stated on the commentary to the movie that Shades wears glasses to shield his eyes from the sun, as he spends most of his time in space repairing satellites, and has returned to Earth but is struggling to adjust. The part of Shades was originally intended for Jeffrey Combs. The late Mark Northover plays Alvy, who runs a junk and repair shop. If you are a fan of the film Willow, you will recognise Mark as he played Burglecut, one of the best characters in that movie. It's hard to tell if Mark has been dubbed or not. It doesn't sound like his voice. It could be an ADR issue, but it's always left me a bit unsure if that's his real voice. The late William Hootkins plays Lincoln, the voyeuristic pervert who lives opposite Jill and spies on her. William is a superb actor and has popped up in many movies playing small parts. He was in Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Superman 4, and before filming Hardware he was in Batman playing Lieutenant Eckhart. William would ad-lib a lot of his disgusting perverse lines and freaked out the women on set. For the movie's cameos, we have Iggy Pop providing his voice as Angry Bob, the radio disc jockey who delivers the depressing news of the day. Richard Stanley originally wanted John Lydon, but I believe he was unavailable, but the producer Nick Powell of Palace Pictures, who had connections with Virgin Records, helped in getting Iggy involved. Cole McCoy plays the Nomad who opens and ends the movie. The Nomad unearths the Mark 13 robot. Carl at the time was the lead singer of the goth rock band Fields of Nephilim, for whom Richard Stanley had previously directed 2 music videos and designed an album cover. McCoy's character in Hardware is basically the same as it was in Nephilim's work. And finally we have the late great Lemmy from Motorhead playing the water taxi driver. Richard sadly didn't get many of the people he wanted for the movie. Sinead O'Connor was intended for this role as he wanted a woman who looked a bit like Tank Girl, but she pulled out at the last minute. But thankfully Lemmy came to the rescue and took the part apparently for a bottle of Jack Daniels. The movie opens in an irradiated wasteland. A scavenger is seen trekking across the dunes and stumbles across a buried robot. He takes the robot and remaining parts to a junk dealer called Alvy in the city. Mo and his friend Shades bump into the scavenger before he can speak with Alvy and make a deal with him. Mo offers Alvy the remaining parts but keeps the head to give to his girlfriend Jill as a gift for Christmas. As Mo and Jill spend some time together, they are unaware voyeuristic neighbour Lincoln is watching them via a telescope. Mo and Jill argue about the new government sterilisation plan and the morality of having children. In this dystopian world there are strict rules and the population control is now becoming more apparent. Later that evening Jill works the robot head into a sculpture. Mo is unsure what it's supposed to represent and suggests maybe creating something she can sell as money is becoming very tight. Mo receives a phone call from Alvy who urges him to return to his shop. Alvy has been investigating the remaining parts Mo sold him and has discovered they belong to a new robot called the Mark 13, which is a deadly new military machine. Mo reluctantly goes, but the name Mark 13 rings a bell and grabs his Bible and finds the phrase, "No flesh shall be spared." Could this new robot be the government's plan to control the population? Mo finds Alvy dead and discovers evidence that the robot is an experimental combat model, capable of self-repair. Alvy's notes also indicate a defect, a weakness to humidity. Back at the apartment, the robot has fully awoken and reassembles itself using pieces of Jill's metal sculptures, and recharges its power source by draining her apartment's power supply. Mo panics and calls Jill's apartment. The robot answers the phone. Mo gets a quick glimpse of the Mark 13 before it hangs up. He quickly contacts Shades and asks him to check on Jill, but Shades is in the middle of a drug trip and barely coherent. Mo runs back to Jill's before it's too late. Jill awakens and doesn't realise the robot is behind her. She narrowly avoids getting slashed. The apartment is now in lockdown, and there is no way for her to escape. In order to keep within budget, they avoided using complicated optical effects, and they achieved 90% of the visual and special effects within camera. As the story focuses around a deadly robot, Image Animation, who had recently worked on Hellraiser, created all the separate parts that could be operated for each shot. You couldn't have one master shot of the robot as it would be incredibly difficult with their budget. But there does appear to be one master shot, well I think it is, but it's lit with low lighting to hide anything that operates it. As the robot has been put together from random parts, you never get a full idea what it looks like, and it seems to vary in size as well. You only get to see its true form when a 2D graphic is shown to Alvy, when he looks into the remaining parts of the Mark 13. Richard Stanley did want to use stop motion for the robot for its more extended sequences, so we got a full idea of what it looked like, but their budget wouldn't stretch for that effect and the time it takes to animate. They do incorporate reverse photography as you see the robot begin to connect itself together and charging up its power cells from the apartment. The robot employs heat vision to find Jill. Richard said the vision in Predator and Terminator was a bit weak, which he discussed in the commentary for the movie, but I never thought the Terminator was using heat vision in the first film. With Hardware, he really wanted to push the red and blues to represent hot and cold. They do a pretty good job simulating the levels of heat. The movie had a very young makeup and effects guy working on it called Chris Halls, who later changed his name to Chris Cunningham. You may be familiar with that name as he directed many amazing music videos. Chris was only 15 at the time and worked previously on Hellraiser and turned 16 on set, and apparently got very upset with the long shooting schedules and had to be removed off set by the security, and they threw him into a skip. But thankfully his relationship with Richard Stanley wasn't soured, as he worked with him again on his next feature, Dust Devil. The gory visuals employed in the film are pretty gross and don't hold back. You see Lincoln getting his eyes gouged and seeing the security guard get cut in half. It's very graphic. These scenes were trimmed back a little for its original US cut. The movie does have two matte paintings, one at the beginning with the taxi driver and the other which is briefly seen as Jill is hanging out the window. They are both very detailed and expand the world to more than just the industrial shots that open the film. I really wanted to see more of this city and wish more paintings were incorporated. Outside of Jill's window they had to create a city with little money, so an effects technician from Pinewood Studios helped design a perspective background that gave you the impression of a large city, but had to be framed in a particular angle to not give away its size and obvious two dimensions. In all, I think the effects team involved did a brilliant job with the little money they had to make something really impressive and believable. You just can't imagine all this being produced for a movie with under £1 million, and all that money didn't just go on visual effects. I'm probably guessing around £100,000 or less were allocated for the visual effects. Saman Boswell composed a score to Hardware. He had started his film career in 1985 and came to Richard Stanley's attention due to working on the films Stage Fright and Demons 2. Saman went on to have a successful career working on movies such as Shallow Grave and Lord of Illusions. Saman worked heavily with synthesizers, and the budget for Hardware wouldn't allow for orchestral scoring, so everything was done with keyboards and with computers for sampling. Saman had started using the Commodore 64 to sequence his music tracks when he first started out in the industry, but when it came to working on Hardware he used an Apple II with a primitive sampler. The movie was originally temped with music by Morricone, and Saman knew what direction to go with the music and just thought up musical tracks that would fit the visuals, so you have a mix of blues for the opening desert scenes, and as we move into the city more electronic atmospheric sounds and samples come into play. For its limited budget I think Saman creates a very interesting soundscape that demonstrates a variety of his musical skills. My favourite tracks by Saman have to be No Flesh Shall Be Spared, which opens the movie, and the track Jill Burning, which is when she believes she has destroyed the robot after its first attack. Two songs feature heavily in the movie and appear on the soundtrack. When Jill starts sculpting the robot head you can hear the song Stigmata by Ministry, and the track The Order of Death by Public Image ends the movie as it rolls into the credits. The Public Image track I think really fits well with the movie, and every time I hear that song you just think of Hardware. The film did have a soundtrack release in 1990 in the USA and France. The CD and cassette had roughly 44 minutes of music. It was a mix of Simon's work and the contemporary rock songs included. It's been out of print for years and fetches high prices on eBay and Amazon. Thankfully Saman Boswell in 2013 remastered his material for Hardware and put out a 2 CD and LP set featuring new artwork by Graham Humphreys. It was only released in limited numbers, around 1,000 copies. I had thought it sold out, but if you go to Simon's website you can still purchase the CD and LP. Definitely worth hunting down before they finally go out of stock. Hardware was not a film I was familiar with growing up, and only in later years it came to my attention. I heard from friends about its unofficial connection to 2000 AD comics, and they didn't look upon it favourably, but I was intrigued to see it. Due to its legal problems I attempted to hunt it down, but there was no DVD at the time. I certainly wasn't going to locate an old VHS copy, as I abandoned that format years ago. So I thought, well, let's find the Laserdisc, but had zero luck finding it as it wasn't a common title. As I started producing videos for YouTube, the question would always pop up for a review on Hardware. Thankfully at that point the DVD and Blu-ray had got its release, so I picked it up and watched it for the first time only just a year or two ago, and to be honest I found it an underwhelming experience. Firstly, it's a great looking movie, there's no doubt there. Its photography, production design, in-camera practical robot effects, and Richard Stanley's visual eye really created something quite unique. And when you consider its very low budget, they made a small independent movie look like something Hollywood was putting out at the time with 10 times the amount of money spent. But the main problem I had with it was the story was kind of wafer thin. It gets most of its plot out of the way about 30 minutes into the movie, then descends into chaos, which could be seen as a positive for some, but for me it felt like a short story stretched out to 90 minutes. Criticisms of its plot is something Richard Stanley is aware of, as he says the rest of the movie becomes a nightmare once the plot is laid out in the first quarter. There is a lot of padding in the film as the plot struggles to fill out the remaining runtime. Jill watching the TV, the lovemaking scene felt like an extended sci-fi music video thanks to all the added video graphics, and the pervert Lincoln just adds a layer of unwanted nastiness to the film. Lincoln does get what he deserves as he comes to a gruesome death. With it going with the idea of the whole story focusing around Jill's apartment, it begins to run out of steam. We know they are trying to keep the budget down and having one location makes sense in that regard, but I was just wanting to see more of what was outside the window. As an audience member, it's very much like being stuck in a room and you can't get out, and when you do manage to escape, it's not for long. When the robot attacks the second time, you get that feeling that the film has run its course. If the robot exited her flat and attacked the other people, then it would step up the action to offer something a little different. But we just have Jill suit up and take on the robot with more aggression after the death of Mo, and finally defeats it with a little help from Shades. With the film dealing with drug use with two other characters, you notice that Mo is the only one that is clean and sober, but he unfortunately gets killed off. Richard Stanley believes people often perform better while intoxicated or high during a crisis, so Jill, who was stoned throughout, and Shades, who was tripping off LSD, survive their encounter with the robot. I don't think everyone performs well in a crisis while high in real life, but maybe Richard and his friends are better at dealing with problems while completely mashed. With it being a genre movie, it doesn't really do anything radically new with it. With the success of The Terminator and Alien, it brought on a lot of copycats, and Hardware follows a similar path with, say, The Terminator, but it does offer something else than just being a carbon copy, however. It deals with people in a future where people are using technology to replace body parts, the public are living under a harsh military dictatorship, and everyone is crammed into cities to avoid the radiation of the surrounding wasteland, very much like Mega City 1. So the movie confidently offers something new to the genre of science fiction on the big screen. Many films around the time were trying to copy James Cameron's style of lighting as well, with the use of blues and greys, and Hardware pushes a strong use of orange and earthier colours, which is another example of it steering itself away from the common comparisons one could make. The performances of the cast involved is generally pretty good. Dylan sadly doesn't really get much to do apart from kickstarting the plot and introducing Jill to the robot, and from then on he's off screen for a while until he has to try and save her and fails miserably. Shades we never really get to know and just experience him struggling to deal with his drug problems, so we are left in the capable hands of Stacy Travis as Jill. She only had a few roles under her belt at the time, but thankfully holds the film together as she battles the Mark 13. Richard Stanley, shortly after making Hardware, had started writing a sequel, and the script has been finished for nearly 25 years. The story would focus around Shades, who becomes the main character, and Jill takes a step back into a more secondary role. It would be set at Thanksgiving instead of Christmas like the first movie, and the story would involve a siege. We finally get to see the Mark 13 robots attack the population and perform their programming as intended, but due to issues with the rights which Richard had to sign away when making the film back in 1989, has halted any progress on doing a sequel. In 2015 there were discussions of a TV series, but yet news on its development has gone silent. Richard Stanley I have a lot of time for. He's a very intelligent chap who in interviews is a joy to listen to as he discusses the ups and downs of his career and views on films in general. The documentary Lost Souls, about the disastrous making of on the island of Dr. Moreau, highlights his great vision for the movie, but also highlights his eccentric nature and his dealings with witchcraft as he battles his own demons as the production falls apart. The documentary is certainly worth a watch, and it's very sad how Richard's career in the movies was basically ruined due to Val Kilmer's on-set behaviour and ego. Val later apologised for his actions, but the damage had been done long ago. Richard hasn't disappeared from making films, but instead focused on short movies and documentaries over the years to keep his creative juices flowing. I personally would love to see him return to mainstream cinema and bring his mad ideas and visual eye to something new in the sci-fi genre, for example. Hardware is ultimately a flawed film, but a very interesting one. The story's not going to keep you fully engaged as it's pretty thin, as mentioned earlier, but like many films of this nature, its strength lies in its design and visuals. I think for most people who have a strong connection and fondness for it, appreciate those qualities. I certainly feel it gets better on repeated viewing, but I didn't think on second or third viewing that I saw it in a whole new light, but it did highlight other themes and subtext Richard Stanley had subtly put into its narrative, and the personalities of the characters. It felt like there was something deeper in the story that was fighting to come out, but either was cut out by the studio or changed in the scripting process to make it more commercial. This was Richard's first feature-length movie, and it's rare for any director to hit all the marks with their first try. They have tight schedules and budgets, clearly don't have a control over casting, and there's always studio interference. I don't think Hardware is for everyone. If you are looking for a rich and engaging story, then I suggest looking elsewhere. But if you love movies that deal with dystopian futures and robots that go on a rampage and kill everyone, then I'm sure Hardware will tick enough boxes to satisfy your needs for entertainment on a Saturday night.
Shades! Okay. Thank God you're home, man. I need your help.
Hi.
Shades, listen to me. This is serious.
Jill is in trouble. You gotta help her. This is serious, man.
It's cool. It's cool. It's cool.
What's wrong with you, Shades?
Not tonight, Shades. Listen to me.
Shades! Shades! Shades, listen to me! Shades! Listen to me, Shades! Come back! Come back, Shades!
I want you to go to the apartment. I want you to get Jill right now. Right fucking now. I want you to bring her back to your place and lock the door till I get there. Are you listening to me?
Just let me get my trousers on, okay?
Chase, listen, I'm counting on you, man. I'm counting on you. Okay?
Everything is under control.
If you enjoyed the video, you can find more on my YouTube channel, and also you can follow me on Twitter. If you want to help support the channel, you can donate through Patreon and receive monthly perks such as updates on the latest news on my channel, early access to reviews and commentaries before they go live on YouTube. Even the smallest donation can help keep this channel going. Thank you.